Hello, friends. How are you? So I thought I would take a stab at sharing my initial thoughts about this bill I hear is working its way through the California legislature. I'll just genericize it as rent control. And typically when I see kind of new information, as I kind of digest it, I kind of break it down into three sections just so I can logically understand what's going on as opposed to acting emotional. I think a lot of times, people hear the headlines, emotion takes over, and then you're just kind of spiraling. So what I typically do is I try to remain calm. I think about the why, right? What is the why behind it? Then I talk about the facts, right? The black and white facts as I read and understand. And then I kind of try to daisy chain together what might likely happen. It's always difficult to predict the future, especially with something that's still not law or done yet, because it can go through lots of iterations. So let's do that with this. At least what I've read maybe four full articles and kind of some summary of what other people took away. So I'll share it all, and I'm sure this will evolve over time. But I wanted to give you my first um, opinions on it now that I've kind of sat on it for 24 or 36 hours. So first off, the why. I think the why is pretty legitimately understood. That California has an affordability problem. Saying California has an affordability problem is kind of too generic. I think it's predominantly dominated by some of the biggest cities, but in general, housing is expensive in California compared to the rest of the U.S. statewide, and it's expensive to own, and it's expensive to rent, and frankly expensive to build. And I mean, there's lots of things about housing in California that is, it's just expensive. It depends if you're an owner, a builder, a renter. It's expensive. So I think it's fair to say that that's a well-known fact. I also think there's the general understanding that the people that suffer the brunt of this expensive place where we live in, if you live in California, are the people that are most vulnerable, right? Living a paycheck to paycheck, call it lower middle class, lower class, whatever you want to call it. I think there's the general feeling that they are most at risk to a housing shakeup. And I think I think that logically makes sense, and we need to protect them. And frankly, I think California has a bigger problem where it's kind of being hollowed out in the middle, at least again in the biggest cities, which may be even a longer term problem. So again, I think I think it's accurate, right? Housing is expensive to buy, it's expensive to build, and it's expensive to rent. So I think the why is understood. So as far as the facts go, I understand the facts as the legislation sits today. This obviously can change, as I think it's only worked its way through one branch of the state government, but it still needs to go forward. So first off, they've capped it. They capped rent increases at 7% a year. I believe the original authoring of the document wanted 5. I think they landed on 7. I think they are mirroring Oregon, which was the first state, as I understand it, in the union to have statewide rent control. So they're kind of basically following Oregon through the hole that they created. And probably other states will follow as well, because once the hole's open, they kind of run through it. They do have a clause that says I think it rolls off in 3 years, which I think is just code for it. They'll try again in a couple of years, or they want to change it or whatever. But it seems really odd that it would only last 3 years, but that's what's currently in the document. And again, subject to change. They did have a clause that exempts landlords that own less than 10 single family homes, which will protect the quote unquote mom and pop investors, which I think is important. So, if you do the classic buy a house, live in it, rents it out while you upgrade, for the most part, you're exempt. Again, as I read the legislation today, it's 10 units and below. 10, it says specifically, I think 10 single family homes and below are exempt. So that's interesting. And then the other thing that I read that I thought was particularly interesting is they're also including houses that are younger than 10 years. I think the old bill Costa something exempt those because, again, building them are so expensive. Building new stuff in California is so expensive that they exempted those units, and thus gave builders incentive to build new stuff. And you're going to see in a minute that's a big deal. So that's, as I understand it, what's going on. I think the headline is California rent control. As you'll see in a minute, when you step back, look at it, it's, as a landlord, it's not particularly exciting to me, obviously, just the headline. But I think, when you step back and you're a good, a person, I think the facts are interesting. And again, I say this as a landlord. First and foremost, 7%. Assuming you're running a smart business, I can't think of anything I've raised more than 7%. And historically speaking, what I've done is I've actually let rent increases slip a couple of years, right? I hit a rent increase and then I don't do it for 2 years because I can make that call. So what this law basically tells me to do is, nope, everybody gets a rent increase every year. So again, I really think there's going to be some unintended consequences that happen because why would a landlord now who used to go, you know what, I'll give you a break 1 year and I'll raise it, 10% in 2 years because you're a good tenant. Now you're basically going to get a 5% hit every year because the landlord doesn't want to miss that, where they were okay not getting it before. Again, these I don't know, these legislators that own units don't know what's going on, I guess. So now what they're basically guaranteeing is you, as renters, now will get a rent increase every 12 months. Again, unintended consequences. I don't want to do it. But if those are the rules of California, unfortunately, every one of my tenants will get a rent increase every year going forward. Second, a 7% raise, again, if you're running a good business, is quite healthy. Right? That's, that doesn't happen very often. Certainly to existing tenants, at least I can't recall one that was that large, assuming I had them at market the year before. That's a healthy increase. So again, that number doesn't really shock me, assuming I run a smart business. Where again, it's unfortunate is if you're running, you've owned stuff and you're mom and pop and you've been doing it for 20 years and you don't want a rate increase, but then you try to sell your property is going to be worth less. It's again, legislation is capping the income because, again, rentals are based on income. And if you're running a bad business or you haven't raised rents for 10 years and, you're just plugging along, when you go to sell that, your value is going to be less because historically speaking, what you would do to buy it is you go, okay, I'll buy it, clean it up, raise it to market and move on. Well, that's not going to be possible. So again, what the legislation is doing is if you have owned these properties for a long time, kept rents way below market because whatever reason, when you go to sell, your property is going to be worth less because the new owner is not going to be able to raise rents by more than 7%. And let's just say you're 30% under market. So it's going to be 4 or 5 years before that new owner is at market. So again, your value is lower. I'm sorry. Then the thing that's really going to hurt is development of affordable housing is once again in California not going to happen. If you're a builder and you felt strongly that you wanted to build newer houses because you were exempt because it's less than 10 years and you wanted to fill that void in the affordable housing, there's less incentive to do that now. And this is the unintended consequences always of rent control is you're removing incentives for capitalists to invest where there's a hole in the market. And again, rent control is going to further reduce affordable housing. And, the really sad part is it probably doesn't impact the 3 years that this law is on the books. It has a lag, right? It takes time to get, it takes a year, I hear, to get something built, right? Designed and built in California. So, we're going to feel this in 5 to 7 years. And people are going to be wondering why. And it's going to be because of this rent control. So at the end of the day, I think I don't know what you want to call it, the reasons why of rent control are valid, and we have an affordability problem in California. I would rather see legislation tack these ridiculous costs to build in California. It needs to be easier to build stuff in California, especially in cities where there is still land and room to grow. We need to remove the burden. We need to remove all these fees. And I mean, I don't understand. It's so expensive to build stuff in California. If we just cut that in half or 75% or, whatever, we could build our way out of this. Employment would get even better, and we'd get net population increase if we were building. Once again, California is a great place to live, weather-wise and job-wise and all these things. But, legislation likes taxes. They like all their fees, and it's hard to remove those, historically speaking. So it's unfortunate. I also think this law is going to hurt renters again. It always does. Now, for guys like me who used to do it every other year for good tenants, I'm sorry, you're going to get rent increases every year because that's what California wants me to do. Your legislation wants me to raise your rent every year, where before it was my call when I wanted to do it. Now they're telling me to raise it every year. I'm sorry, talk to your legislation. And again, we're going to have less units built because less than 10 years. This doesn't affect me, but again, I just can see it coming. And again, the mom and pops are protected, right? If you have less than 10 single family homes, you're good. You're exempt from this. So, you can feel good about them protecting the mom and pop. So at the end of the day, I don't see this state legislation as all that bad. I do think the people that are going to suffer the most are the renters, the people it purports to help, which is, these unintended consequences of rent control are real. And I feel for it because again, I'm a human being first, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Again, this is not, as I understand it, law yet. It's still working its way through legislation. This could take 17 different curves from here to there, but I think it's pretty certain that California wants to follow the hole that Oregon created, and it's likely coming. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. All right, take care. Have a nice day.